Southerner, leaving the South, and what were really quite some constraints at the time in social living. And she did, by the way, always maintain her Southern gentility. She was a lady. Um, in a sense, we have photographs of her sculpting these mammoth granite beings in her pencil skirt up on the scaffolding. and or carving very hard northern cedar totem type of sculptures in her smock. And she only used hand tools. She didn't use power tools. She was a woman who somehow picked up a sense of herself and let the events of destiny lead her. As she developed her mastery, she just followed the crumbs of what was sort of laid out in front of her. And so I find it fascinating that in reading a poem book, which has chapters of different projects that Sir Peter Smithers wrote, in the chapter on Ann Norton, he actually did refer to her as a mystic. And I know from being around the gardens for about 11 years, day and night with special events, with the 5,000 or more school kids that we bring in for educational programs. They learn everything from literacy, both reading and writing side of literacy, from Earth Day or Garden Day, where they learn about cultivation and generating nature and plants and growing things. And then Earth Day, where we talk a little bit more about recycling and reusing and repurposing. And other events like Healthy Art and Healthy Hearts, where the kids not only get to create art in Ann's studio and then display it in her galleries, but they learn about a rainbow of fruits and vegetables. So they can teach their parents about how to pick out the best fruits and vegetables in the grocery store or at the market that supports their health and their learning. So all of these are things that go on in the garden day after day throughout our season. And I think I started this by saying that Sir Peter said she was mystical. We often feel her spirit there. Now, just a little addendum to the Tibetan story with me. At my event, which had led me there in the first place, it was held in February of 2009. In attendance at the event was a friend of the cello player who happened to be the nephew of the Dalai Lama. And his name was Jigme Norbu. And we got to know one another. He had a very deep experience at the garden the night of my event, went home, kind of cleaned up his life, and took on the mantle of his father, who had recently died, in terms of Tibetan freedom. And he often did walks and bike rides and other special events supporting Tibet and Tibetan freedom. And he called me about a year later, so this is now 2010, and asked me, well, in fact, told me that he'd had some kind of spiritual download, and I was supposed to organize and lead a walk down the coast of Florida. This is a 300-mile walk along the coast of Florida, and we started in St. Augustine and ended up in the Ann Norton Sculpture Gardens 2 weeks later. The thing is, and the sad note is, that on the end of the first day after walking 28 miles, very unfortunate event where Jigme sent myself and Wangchuk Dorje, who was a retired exiled congressman from Tibet, sent us ahead to meet a group of people, and Jigme never made it. He was actually hit by a car and killed. And in the shocking event to us, we had to deal with the realities of his death. And yet, 2 days later, we were back on the road, walking towards the Sculpture Gardens to complete the walk, as we knew he wanted to, and his family wanted us to do that. In fact, one of his brothers and 2 of his 3 children did join us later. We did end 2 weeks later in the Sculpture Garden, And that place is now the outdoor learning center for students and special events. So it's become a very sacred spot, and that keeps me tied in to the Sculpture Gardens on a spiritual level. And so this is just one small aspect of the work we do there, the things I get to be involved in terms of special events, holding receptions for civic groups. I had one very cool encounter, I guess I'll call it that. It was the executive women's group that had organized to hold their annual selection of the Woman of the Year. And as we were preparing the evening, I was leading people outside to the tent and the event. And there were about 4 gentlemen in the group, and one of them looked a little bit familiar, and I was trying to think if I'd seen him at the Chamber of Commerce meeting, and didn't quite register. Well, he showed up, he came out and found me standing there, and he said, "Oh, just tell me a little bit about the gardens." So I gave him the 2-minute version, and I said, "And by the way, if you look straight ahead over the Himalayan sculpture, straight ahead of you, tonight is a full moon, and in about an hour and a half or so, the full moon will be hanging there in the sky right over the sculpture, looking east over the Atlantic Ocean, and it looks absolutely beautiful, and hopefully you'll have a chance to see it." And I noticed him smirking, but I didn't know why. Well, then somebody whisked out and dragged him away, and I realized he'd left his jacket on the chair on the porch. So as I went to lift the jacket to take it back to him, I saw patches all over it that said NASA astronaut Mark Kelly. And so, in fact, he had already seen the moon from a glorious aspect. But he was such a kind man, a good man, and it was a thrill to have met him in that capacity and not to have been flustered because, you often get flustered when you meet people like that. But he was just so natural and lovely. But back to the Ann Norton Sculpture Garden as we wrap up here. It is open to the public from October through June at this point. We have annual events like the Sculpture in Motion Vintage Car Show. We have all of the educational programs and more coming on board. We'll have jazz in the garden this year and also some mindfulness classes going on. All of these things that Ann Norton wanted in terms of leaving her legacy. So in her case, for sure, the life she lived is the legacy she left. And she's left it for us to share as visitors in the Sculpture Garden. And like I said in the opening, hopefully you can find a place near you where you can find your own oasis, whatever that means to you. And, find a place that pulls on your heartstrings, that brings meaning, that allows you to share with other people, perhaps, whether you are there in a professional capacity or you're just there as a visitor, and you bring people along to allow them a few moments of peace and of inspiration and just enjoying the beauty that's around us every day, wherever we are. So I'm going to call it a wrap at the moment. And thank you for being here with me on Living Legacy Leadership. And look forward to seeing or hearing how you might bring history to life yourself. So thanks to my producer today, Emmanuel. Thanks to you, our listeners. And I invite you to check out the SOB Radio Network archives under Living Legacy Leadership. And also check out GameChangerThinking.com. All right, that's it for me. So remember, the life you live is the legacy you leave. Bye-bye now.